Hi, I'm back for another blue review. This one I might actually review some blues. I haven't done that properly in a few installments. It's been kind of hard to produce these videos lately. I've been under a lot of stress, as I elaborated in some of my last few videos, probably ad nauseum. Um, been anxious, been kind of crashing emotionally, and the nerves are kind of fried right now. And the depression's kind of a big weight, on top of me. So, but I didn't come here come here today to my own house um, to talk about that stuff. I'll try not to get too morose in the middle of my movie reviewing. Basically, I'm just going to review three Criterion titles that I've recently rewatched, um, and very proud to have in my collection. And just really going to talk about the movies themselves. I mean, the Blu-rays are all top notch, loaded with extras, and extremely nice looking prints, 4K remasterings. One of them might be on 2K remastering. Um, but they're all ones that are, well, two of them are pretty well known. One of them isn't as well known. So let's start out with the more obscure one of the three. It's called Death by Hanging by Nagisa Oshima. And Oshima was a leading light of the Japanese new wave of filmmakers in the 60s and 70s. Um, Probably maybe the best well known of them, I'm not sure. He did a series of interesting films, only about half of which I've seen, leading up to the mid 70s when he did this kind of film that was co produced with French funding, and it was kind of a crossover hit. It was like an art house erotic hit. It kind of came at the tail end of porno chic in America, where it was actually okay for people to go and see X-rated movies with graphic, unsimulated sex as part of the storyline. And that film does have that, and it's based on a true story, kind of a scandalous story from Japan from the 1930s. Um, I have that Blu-ray as well. Maybe sometime I'll talk about that in depth. I'm not sure. It's one I don't revisit that much, but in the realm of the census. But I do think it's really a classic, and I was glad to have it. I kind of scored it for free. Just it could be an accident. Someone was getting rid of it, and my last job where we did my job was to do intake on the media, used media, and appraise them and price them, etc. And someone had left that one behind, and the employees really weren't supposed to take the stuff that would not possibly in the freebie bin. But one of my managers was cool enough to let me have it. And so I know Corrida, I think that's the original name of in the realm of senses. I got that free of charge. So several years before he did that film, 1968, he did this Death by Hanging. I first saw it on YouTube uh, about maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I had heard about it. I had seen it in a few film books, stills, and heard that it was kind of notorious or whatever, but I wasn't sure why exactly. I think it's just because it deals with the controversial topic of, ongoing controversy of capital punishment, and hence the title, Death by Hanging. Um, so basically, it's like this guy named R, who is a Korean living in Japan. He has raped and killed two young ladies, and he at the beginning of the film he is being executed, and you've got all the people, the normal witnesses, not the like victims' family witnesses who watch it through the glass, but like the attendants, the people who actually work the execution, like the warden and the education chief and security chief. They're all kind of there. Prosecutor. There's like six or seven. There's a doctor, I think, and a priest, a chaplain rather. And these characters are just this is one of the most absurd movies I've ever seen. I mean, by the end, it gets kind of somewhat profound and existentialist, but it starts out with this kind of absurd and interesting premise is that they execute this cat and it doesn't kill him. The hanging doesn't kill him. And so they have to determine what is all the legalities, the legal and moral ramifications of trying to do it again, because technically he's already gained absolution from the chaplain. He's already paid for his crime, and he's seemingly not in his right mind, so he's mentally incapacitated, and they want them to be alert so they can, feel the weight of the judgment on them for their wrongdoing, the guilt, and so there's just it's an impossible scenario and it's absurd because they bicker about these crazy things. It's kind of like in Doctor Strangelove where the guy says, "Stop fighting, it's a war room." This is kind of like, you know, uh, we've got to kill this guy, but he's already dead. We got to kill this killer. And then, of course, the quandary comes up towards the end: is the state a killer too? Is the state a murderer? Is the nation a murderer for putting men to death for these crimes? Uh, so I would gather that Oshima is not a big fan of the death penalty. But this is so it's kind of like a lot of these films from that era. The '60s was such a era of revolution and controversy and maybe a somewhat shift in consciousness worldwide in the arts and in thought and in film and in a lot of these Japanese films. You have this very rigid society, and there's a number of these filmmakers who are criticizing it, just painstakingly criticizing it, but doing it within the veil of an entertaining film. And like Harakiri, which is I reviewed before, is attacking the samurai code, the Bushido code, and its uptight adherence to tradition and rules to the exclusion of any moral consideration or of common sense. Um, so Oshima's kind of doing this in the present day. He's directly taking on the state in Japan, and he's also commenting on relations between Japan and Korea, having this guy being a Korean who was born in Japan. His parents are from Korea. Japanese imperialism ground down the Koreans, and so there's a lot of Korean Japanese animosity on both sides in this film. And different characters are the mouthpieces of them for them at different times. Um, but the main character R, they basically spend the movie trying to get him to remember that he is R, and therefore can be mentally, well, the opposite of mentally capacitated, and he can then feel guilt for his crimes, remorse, whatever, and then therefore have an effective second and hopefully permanent execution by hanging. So it gets ridiculous purposefully, because time after time they're trying to get him to remember his past life. So they actually begin acting out his younger life. They act out his crimes, and it's to the level of utter absurdity. And there's a character called the Education Chief. I don't know the name of the actor. I should have looked that up. But he's like a total buffoon. He's kind of the comic relief of the movie. Every scene he's ridiculous. And then the chaplain, he's got his whole hang up with God, and a lot of the things, a lot of the philosophical things that these people throw at each other that are humorous. Sometimes it reminds me of The Ninth Configuration by William Peter Blatty, where these characters are just saying these outrageous things that represent an archetype or an idea, but it's done in this almost slapstick fashion. So this is kind of definitely the closest to that kind of absurdism that I personally have seen in Japanese film. I'm sure there's tons of other examples, but this one is definitely a lot of absurdist humor, and which I like a lot, and um, But toward the end, like I said, it gets a bit heavier as we kind of delve into who this guy really was, because they're trying to get him to remember he's R, character's name, just a single letter R. His Korean name, his real name. He went by a Japanese name, K. And, he's trying to, they're trying to identify him with who he is, and it gets very existential. Like, when does he realize he's himself? And the chaplain is saying things like, he's not R, he's non R. And, then you step back and, yeah, these are absurd comments. And, but the end's well done. And it definitely makes a comment on this subject. Well, it does it in a really cool way. It's beautifully shot, black and white, and which is kind of one of my favorite things is 60s black and white widescreen Japanese films. I'm a sucker for the way they look, and I could watch them all day probably, and have. Um, so yeah, that's Death by Hanging. I guess I could say it's an experience. Interesting premise. Just like I said, absurd humor. So I guess I recommend it. I guess I tepidly recommend it. No, I recommend it. It's not a movie that you get like super excited about, but it is one that you go, wow, I really need to see this. This is kind of interesting. What the hell? How do they work out this premise? And that's what I like about it is the premise is worked out to all the details and all the way through to the end. And that's really good writing, and I enjoyed it. So I also watched Beauty and the Beast, La Belle et la Bête, John Cocteau, 1946. And that's a classic, and in my opinion, it's the best rendition of Beauty and the Beast. I mean, there's been a zillion. The only other one that I actually think is remotely close is more of a departure is the 80s TV series with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton. Um, isn't that who was in it? Linda Hamilton? I think so, yeah. Unless I'm misremembering. For some reason, I want to say it was another actress, but I think it was her. But it was definitely Ron Perlman under that makeup. And anyway, that was one that I grew up with. That was pretty cool. But it's in the modern day. It's a big, like I said, it's a somewhat of a big departure. But this one is adapted straight from the fairy tale. And if you've seen any Cocteau, he didn't direct too many films, but the ones he did are so visually memorable and such beautiful kind of visual poetry that they're pretty indelible. So this one is his most well-known film, and um, part of the reason it's well-known is because people seek it out who have seen the Disney version or other earlier versions and want to see this. Fairy tales are always in currency, it seems like, especially with Disney. Um, but this is a superior achievement, and it's played pretty straight, and it's got just a lot of magic and fanciful things that happen, and they're all rendered visually really well. The beast looks incredible. He's like a feline kind of creature. He's like just dressed to the nines, kind of Shakespearean outfit, and he has these great claws, but he wears magic gloves most of the time. And he like gives Belle the magic glove for a while, and she like teleports home, and all kinds of crazy things happen. When her father comes upon the castle or whatever of the beast, which is what gets her into the whole snare of having to be married off to him, because he threatens the father. He's like, you better give me one of your daughters or I'll kill you. And he doesn't gladly do it, but he more or less does it because then he gets sick and he's like, oh, and so Belle's like, I'll do it. And she's got two evil older sisters, just like Cinderella. The two evil, I guess they're not really stepsisters, but sisters. They have this goofy brother who's wearing this kind of 1980s style mullet and dressed kind of like D'Artagnan. And he's just, I guess he's there for humorous relief. Um, and then Jean Marais, our star, um, plays a character, Avenant, who is courting Belle. And they never quite hook up. And Avnon is he's kind of a scoundrel like the brother, but a little bit more noble seeming, a little more handsome, daring do kind of guy. But, really, as we see towards the end, not really, pretty rotten, really, to the core. Um, this is the double role. So Jean Marais also plays the Beast. I feel like the ending where Avnon gets his comeuppance and the Beast gets his redemption at near as he's near death, and they kind of body swap. I kind of felt like that was basically saying that, and it kind of does say it blatantly that love will make an ugly man beautiful or whatever, a monster beautiful. But they also say, hate can make a, beautiful person a monster, etc. Like her sisters are supposed to be beautiful, but they're monsters. Though they're really not beautiful at all. They just kind of think they are. And they wear these ridiculous outfits. I'm sure these were worn publicly at one time in history. It's just really hilarious seeing these neck these collars that go all the way up and down, and they're just stiff and don't move. And they're just having dinner dressed that way. Not a fancy dinner, a dinner at a kind of poor looking table, with the whole family, and they're dressed, in this regal garb, and they're really full of themselves. They're the schemers of the film, and the brother and Avnon. Basically, everyone is scheming against Beauty and the Beast, except the dad. He's pretty cool, and so we all know how the story turns out. And like I said, it's kind of a message that really, I would say the Beast is more beautiful than Avnon in appearance, and of course, they're saying that yeah, he's a more beautiful person. He's a better human being, even though he's part animal than this other guy. But why do his looks have to change? I mean, he was cool as hell before. Um, Jean Marais is more like this kind of foppish dandy guy, and he's just too perfect looking for Belle, and because she's not really gorgeous either. She has a nice kind of delicate beauty, but it's not particularly memorable. Her features, she's not incredibly just, you don't go wow, that never the word wow never went through my head when I saw Belle in this movie. The acting is great. I like her character a lot, but it's just ironic that she's the beauty and she's not stunning, but the Beast, who is supposed to be ugly, uh, actually is striking looking and quite fascinating. Um, so, yeah, this is a great one. It's nice to just kind of put on and chill too, and you kind of lose yourself in that world. Um, so that's La Belle et La Bête. So the other one I watched, the last one I'll talk about is one that probably no one guessed until a few short years ago that would ever be on a Criterion release. Uh, and it's called Multiple Maniacs by John Waters from 1971. And, they that's a lot of bright light coming. I actually have the Death by Hanging on now, and but it's black and white, and the whites are very bright. So finally got some good lighting just because of the television. Um, Multiple Maniacs, yeah, it's one of this set of John Waters films that Criterion got a hold of, and obviously they've done Polyester and Multiple Maniacs and Female Trouble. I'm not sure if they ever did Pink Flamingos or not, but I'm pretty sure it's on their slate if they haven't. They did, but they haven't done Desperate Living or announced it, which I think that's kind of his kind of masterpiece. Personally, I think that is Waters' masterpiece. It's his most kind of trenchant and really kind of caustic kind of satire, almost. Hard one to classify, and it's the only major Waters film that Divine does not appear in, and so it's not quite as audacious all the way through the movie as Divine. As Divine always is like the center of attention in these films. If you haven't seen John Waters movies and you have no clue who Divine is, then I don't know. I'm not sure why you're watching my channel. No, I'm just kidding. But uh, go out and do yourself a favor and watch one of these movies I just named. I don't know how you can get a hold of them. They're not on streaming that I'm aware of. But heck, do Criterion a favor and buy them. Buy the Blu-rays. Get a Blu-ray player if you don't have one, and then buy the Blu-rays. And you've done your duty, man, as a cinephile. Um, Waters is one of the few like comedy directors that I actually respond to. Comedy is really subjective, and I'm not a huge fan of it as a genre, like a lot of people are. A lot of my girlfriends have been very disappointed that I wasn't into comedies. My ex-wife liked romantic comedies. Um, it's really not my thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I liked Woody Allen, but I don't care for his stuff so much anymore. And of course, he did branch off from comedy, but I thought he was hilarious when I was a kid, and I loved stuff like Benny Hill, Monty Python. That was getting closer to my kind of sense of humor. Um, but as I've gotten older, a lot of the absurdist humor I respond to better, kind of sly and a little more intelligent and um, mischievous. And I do like Kevin Smith of Modern People. I respond to his movies. I think they're pretty hilarious. Uh, Maybe because I didn't exactly grow up like Kevin Smith, but I was kind of on the edge of suburbia and the fringes of knowing people like Kevin Smith and his friends. My family was really too poor to associate with people like that, and that's pretty bad. Um, but so I was around the comic book geekery and the hanging out at malls and just being a slacker. And I mean, we're Gen X. So, I mean, we were the slacker generation. So Jay and Silent Bob are like probably icons to some of my generation. Um, Probably just some friends of mine, but I enjoy Kevin Smith. But John Waters is unfailingly hilarious to me. And one of the opening scenes of Female Trouble, I lose control every time I see it. It's still hilarious. Uh, but this one, Ultimate Maniacs, yeah, it's pretty funny too. It's pretty sick. It doesn't quite go as far as Pink Flamingos does. I mean, what does really? But it's near there. It's perched in between Mondo Trasho, his first feature, and Pink Flamingos. And Mondo Trasho, I believe, is the one that opens with an executioner beheading a real chicken with a real axe on camera. And, of course, Pink Flamingos ends with Divine eating dog feces, real dog feces on camera, really eating it. Um, so, wow. What bookends? So, I guess if you just can't handle that kind of stuff, which it's not very easy to handle. Um, then Multiple Maniacs is a really nice compromise because it doesn't have any scenes that are quite that graphic that are unsimulated as those films do. Well, the Pink Flamingo also has some hardcore sex activity that's unsimulated too, but and a chicken again. Not chicken doesn't have sexual activity, but he just has to throw the chickens in there. I guess because well, I mean, it's like surrealism. The animals inexplicably appearing in a urban environment is always surreal, and Buñuel would do that all the time with his films. You walk into someone's living room or bedroom, and the cow would be sitting on the couch, or I mean, it's absurd. Exactly, it's absurd. Um, of course, nowadays David Lynch does things of this nature, not necessarily with animals, but that absurd surrealist strain he's kind of inherited, along with Cocteau's kind of visual surrealism. So I liked Multiple Maniacs. Basically, it's a warm up for the story of Pink Flamingos. It's where they're trying to, in a contest for the most grotesque or disgusting people or family, on Earth. So they just keep upping the ante of horrific acts. This is kind of the beginning of that. I mean, this plot is similar. I mean, there's a cavalcade of horrors or whatever. They have this little carnival. It's not really. There's not much to it. I mean, there is like about 10 of them. They're kind of bums, kind of hippies, degenerates, drug addicts, and they're basically hanging out and Divine is kind of their ringleader, kind of a criminal, kind of a fraudster. Again, a character that she kind of revisits in Pink Flamingos and also in Female Trouble, or she kind of takes that kind of character to its absolute limit. Uh, in this film, the characters pretty much the actors go by their real names, pretty much as far as their characters. I guess that was easier for them to remember the dialogue. I mean, it just looks like something that was shot in John Waters' neighborhood in Baltimore on the fly, and it was, and so I mean, it was the Clerks of its day, I mean, it's just verite all the way, and I just think it's hilarious. It's got a great grainy look. I think it was shot on 16 millimeter and blown up later, but I think this might be a 2K scan of this Blu-ray, but someone can correct me in the comments if you want. It might be a 4K, but I don't even know if they could get a 4K out of this thing. But it looks appropriate. The grain is appropriate, and even though it's very clear and the blacks and whites and the balance and all that are super crisp, more than those old videotapes we rented with it on it. Still, it has that squalid, low rent kind of look, and much to its favor. There's a sequence as the movie kind of nears its end, it spirals ever out of control, and Divine gets into ever more outrageous situations that would kill most people, but she keeps going, bloodied but unbowed, until finally she's attacked. Well, here we go back with the animal thing. She's attacked by a gigantic lobster, and it's simulated sex. It's not unsimulated. It's not pornography. It's not bestiality. It's not a real crab. Did I say crab? I said a cancer probably, didn't I? Cancer. I'm a cancer. Cancer. Our symbol is the crab. I said lobster. Yeah, it looks kind of like a lobster, kind of like a crab, and with the pincers and the feelers. What a strange scene. I mean, that's probably the whole budget of the movie was making that thing. That's worth seeing the whole movie for just to get to that. But really out of control and strange stream of consciousness. I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, that's another movie that I would just toss on and just have there, playing and occasionally look up at something outrageous and just really dig that kind of peering into that kind of world, like 1971 Baltimore suburbia, with a bunch of hippie era degenerates, who are influenced by the Manson family, which they talk about the Manson family a good bit on here. So there's a riff on that too. That's a subplot, and that was fresh at the time. John Waters actually attended the trial of one of the major perpetrators, Tex Watson, and I believe corresponded with him for several years afterwards. So, there's a timeliness, is that the right word? Timeliness to this, a topical, timely for its time when it came out. There was a topical reference. Now it's kind of dated and, you're out of the context and, but Tarantino can build a movie around it, so can John Waters, 40 years earlier almost. I liked it. All these movies are cool. I'm not particularly incisive right now, particularly articulate about any of this stuff, but I've made it through the movies. I've made it through the video, about to hit the half hour. So it's my sign to sign off. This has been nice. It's a nice diversion. Keep me out of the doldrums for a half hour and maybe do the same for you. So anyway, I will see you on the next one. I don't know if it'll be a Twin Peaks one or more reviews, and I don't know when I'll do one because these are hard to focus on for me as compared to these kind of soul-bearing videos I've been bombarding you with. These take a bit more, being a bit more on the mental ball, even though that may not be conveyed in this video whatsoever. So watch at your own risk, as always. So